Right. So yeah, I'm just going to cover initially the sort of soil industry, how we see it now, because it has changed over the years, and then look at issues in terms of compaction problems and also how we go about investigating soils on sites. So as a brief introduction, yeah, we run a soil science consultancy, predominantly for the construction industry. We don't get involved with assessment of soils for agricultural production or forestry, those sorts of things, but anything else we look at. I've been doing this for 30 years now, and as a company we've been running since 2006, and we've always had a lovely working relationship with British Sugar TOPSOIL. And I suppose more recently with NHBC, as Emma said, we've been helping to try and update the requirements for back gardens, including sort of decompaction of soils, and hopefully we'll get a change in minimum topsoil depth requirements from 100 mil to at least 150 mil, and being positive, hopefully even more than that, which I'll explain more later. So I'm not an environmental consultant or a geotechnical engineer, but we work alongside both those services. We also work with landscape architects, ecologists, and certainly over the last 10 years, we've done a lot with house builders, both sort of national and regional, because back gardens and public open space are now very important elements of the housing industry. Yep, so covered that with UK topsoil market, soil assessment and compaction problems. So yeah, Kim's given a fantastic overview of British Sugar's operation, which is pretty unique actually, because it takes natural as dug topsoil, which is then completely demolished in the lagoons, and then it's reinstated back into something which will function as a topsoil afterwards. So probably of these three categories, British Sugar falls into the manufactured topsoil one, because it is very much a processed material by the time it leaves site again. But yeah, these are sort of the three main categories that we sort of look at. Natural topsoil, the first priority of any greenfield development site should be securing, protecting, managing the soils on that site, both topsoil and subsoil, for reuse. But as you can see here from the geology map of the UK, just the colours tell you that our geology in the UK, well, this is England and Wales, but it changes massively. And soil, one of the key components of soil is the geology it's derived from. Soils across the country also varies considerably. The clay content varies, silt and sand content, and so on. So just because it's called topsoil doesn't mean to say it's all the same and it will behave the same, and certainly it won't necessarily behave suitably when it's picked up, stockpiled, and put back again into a garden, or it's even imported from another site, and so on. And as the strapline says there, some of the best agricultural soils make the worst landscaping soils, because in agriculture the farmers don't strip and stockpile and move the soils around. Some of the best soils are very, very delicate, silty soils in particular, and they're given grade 1, grade 2 agricultural land classification, but they are miserable when it comes to reusing them for sort of landscaping and ecological applications later on. They just don't survive the handling that's done to them. So to give you a few ideas, this is the sort of, I would say, the perfect scenario in terms of stripping, stockpiling a topsoil. And if you were going to be reusing this soil, there shouldn't be any problems with it. Firstly, it's been stripped when it's in a non-plastic friable state. You can see that on the top right-hand corner, where it's literally crumbling out of the bucket into the dump truck. It's then moved. That all comes down to the combination of soil moisture versus the sand, silt, and clay content that dictates whether it's non-plastic or plastic in consistency. And best practice in the BS and all the other guidance documents says, ideally, try not to handle soils when they're plastic, because it just deforms them and denatures them. So this is the good scenario, and these are images of what happens if the soils are plastic in nature when they're stripped and stockpiles. You can see the composition and the condition of the soil completely deteriorates. Now, if you were buying these soils, say this was surplus topsoil from one site and was going to be sold to your housing development on another site, the paperwork won't necessarily show all this. The paperwork will say, yes, it meets the British standard, but it can't comment on all these things. And so, if you're going to buy this stuff, brilliant. If you're ending up with this stuff, you're taking on a huge liability. It's clean and uncontaminated. It has the right pH, the right organic matter content, but physically, its physical condition, as Emma mentioned in one of her slides, is completely degraded, and it will not drain, it won't aerate, it won't support even grass growth. So natural topsoil is great, but it's got to be in the right condition when it's imported to site or when it's used on a site. Skip waste soils, before manufactured soils came in about sort of 20-25 years ago, the options were natural topsoil, as I've just shown you, or skip waste soils, which is everything and anything that comes into a recycling yard and is put through a screener. This is a sort of a classic scenario. This is a big material recovery operation. I think it was just outside Birmingham, actually. You can see there's a whole melee of different materials here in this image, including quite a bit of what looks like topsoil, possibly subsoil. So this stuff is put through a screener. The screeners have got really, really cool now. This is a three-way screener. It does everything you want. Takes the big bits out, separates it, and so on. As you can see here, this is the biggest fraction that's come out from this. And if you just look closely, and I've highlighted it, what you can see in the very coarse material is a whole melee of different pieces of effectively what we would call foreign matter or demolition materials and so on. So they're easily visible in this stuff. This is what they're going to now call and sell as topsoil. It may be proportionally, there might be some topsoil in there, but I can assure you that a lot of it is not topsoil. It's natural parent material or subsoil, but it looks and feels like topsoil. If you start to look really, really closely at it, you can see the little bits of brick and maybe a little bit of clinker and possibly a little bit of glass, but the fine element doesn't show what the oversized element does, but it's all in there. There is glass in here, there is possibly nails, ceramic tile and all that sort of stuff. Visibly, you can't see it, so it can look great, but chemically and physically, it's poor. I mean, these are just typical examples of what comes through, what goes through the screener. A 10mm screener does not sift out nails, glass, screws, ceramic, and so on. Glass is what, 2-3mm thick in one dimension. It'll go through. Even a 5mm piano wire screen will not remove all the glass. There's no way of removing glass once it's in a soil. And I mean, these photos were taken at the top left and bottom right were taken from back gardens. Albeit before the grass has properly grown. But that was somebody's back garden when the kids were going to play and everything else. So, you just can't have sharps like that sitting there. So in summary, skip waste soil is a really high risk consideration for domestic gardens, public open space areas, public parks, schools, whatever. These are sort of the typical characteristics you have. Horticulturally, it's pretty poor. It's not going to support plant growth very well, and environmentally, it's got a high risk, and not always, but a high risk of physical contaminants like glass and ceramic shards, and probably of more interest to you guys that the chemical contaminants, the list's endless these days: heavy metals, hydrocarbons, etc., asbestos. So cheap and cheerful, cheap but not cheerful. This is the stuff that you really want to try and avoid. And the topsoil industry now is so well established that this shouldn't be used for high-end landscaping purposes. Manufactured topsoils, as I said, they've been around for probably at least 25 years now. Very simple concept. If you like, it's a fast-track version of what Mother Nature does. We take mineral components, organic substrates, blend them together, and you produce a topsoil substitute. It's not topsoil. Natural topsoil takes hundreds of years to develop, but effectively, natural topsoil is a combination of the mineral components from weathering, of geology, and sedimentation, and a combination with plant growth, plant decomposition, and organic biological activity. All we're doing here, these organic substrates, things like green compost, for example, is just a speeded up version of the decomposition process. So a lot of these materials are what you would call either recycled or recovered materials. So, you know, you are ticking the sustainability box here by reusing these because they're repurposed and put into a new use. Again, a whole range of different materials, depending where you are in the country, certain things are available for it, but you know, highly successful. This is the sort of machinery that's used. Again, screeners come into play here, but instead of segregating waste, these are sort of intimately mixing the mineral and the organic components, and out the end comes a finished product. The key with manufactured soils, it's not guaranteed. Just because it's been manufactured doesn't mean it's guaranteed. As Kim stressed really well, you know, there are some less knowledgeable, less scrupulous suppliers out there who, for example, think if they add a bit of compost to some screened skip waste material, they can make a nice topsoil. We also see companies that think more compost is good for the topsoil, and they overload it. They make the salt levels too high, the pH levels too high. So if you use the right components, the right materials, and you mix them at the right ratios with the right equipment, you can make really, really good topsoil substitutes. But the other side of it is if you use the wrong materials and wrong composition, there's a disaster waiting to happen. So the benefits of manufactured soils, you know, I just listed here really. You can tinker with the composition to adjust pH, improve drainage, slow drainage down if you want. You know, play around with fertility status, all sorts of things. You can even add lightweight aggregates to make them lower the bulk density and use them on green roofs and podium landscapes, those sorts of things. So there's lots that can be done. But generally, these are sort of the attributes of manufactured soils that you get if it's done properly. Just moving on to soil assessment now, and I've sort of segregated this into the assessment of site topsoil and subsoil, and the assessment of imported topsoil and subsoil. So the DEFRA Code of Construction Code of Practice, which is titled Sustainable Use of Soils on Construction Sites, is probably the go-to document for the assessment of site topsoil and subsoil. And then, yeah, as Kim's mentioned, the British standard are probably the national guidance documents for imported materials. I do see this a lot actually, where we see local authorities and planning authorities mainly insisting that the site topsoil on any development site should meet the British standard. It's not strictly true. The site topsoil should be fit for purpose, but British standard is only really there for soils which are moved or traded. That's what it says in the documentation. So really it's soils which are going to be moved around the country. The DEFRA Code of Practice is by far the best guidance document for the assessment and management of site soils. And the two main elements are the soil resource survey and the soil resource or soil management plan. And this form of assessment and management is not the same as a typical geotech, geoenvironmental ground investigation. That obviously looks for contamination and geotechnical properties of soils. This is looking at all the other functions of soils that I consider, and I'll come on to that. Likewise, we're not dealing with whether it's waste or non-waste, which is what material management plans do. The soil management plan is all about protecting the resource and making sure when it's respread, reused, it functions properly. So these are the sort of questions which are answered by the soil resource survey. You know, what type or types of soil are there present on site? You know, there might be one topsoil type, but there might be 2 or 3 subsoils or vice versa. And it's very useful to establish that. If you've got a sandy soil, which doesn't become plastic until it's really, really wet, that's going to be a far better soil to recover and keep separate from the other end of the site, which may have a clay soil, which is sticky and wet with a very small amount of extra moisture. The two will perform differently, handle differently, and can be reused for different elements. For example, the heavy clay soil will probably be much better for use in your ecological areas, your sustainable drainage systems and all that sort of stuff, whereas the sandy soils will be far better in back gardens and public open space areas. Biodiversity net gain is obviously with us now, a legal requirement. So again, extending it, not just the suitability of the soils for, say, ornamental planting and turf and that sort of thing. The soil survey will also look at the fertility status and the nature of the soils. Can they be used to implement the biodiversity net gain requirements for the site? You know, particularly you're looking for lower fertility soils. The subsoil often is a better material to reuse as a topsoil for species-rich grassland or wetland areas, for example, swales, that sort of thing. So yeah, these are all the sort of questions that can be answered. That information from the survey is then fed into a soil management plan, which really has sort of two components. The pre-construction stage, where we're talking about dealing with the vegetation before stripping the topsoil and stockpiling it and managing the soils in the stockpile. Here's a couple of examples. Which one would you go for? As Kim very well said, weatherproofing your soil. If you've stripped some nice dry topsoil, don't leave it in an open stockpile like the ones on the right-hand side, because if it sits there over the winter, especially the winter we've had this year, for example, by the time you come to take it out of the stockpile and start re-spreading it in back gardens and landscape areas, it will be like porridge. It will just be soggy, wet and horrible. The best way to manage soils properly is to stockpile them, weatherproof them, seal them in, and then they're as good as they were when they went in, when you bring them out again. Post-construction, so this is getting the landscape areas, including back gardens, ready to receive plants, turf, trees, whatever. These are all the processes that management plan should cover, and I stress subsoil decompaction is really the big one that is still not looked after. As I said, we work for a lot of housing developers, and where they've taken our advice and where they've implemented through their ground worker this type of process to get the back gardens soils working properly, the reduction in customer complaints, the improvements to flooding issues, and the general sort of quality of the landscape scheme in housing developments, it improves massively. If the one thing to do is decompact the subsoils, everything else will generally work out. But this is sort of the process that we go through. In terms of testing imported soils, I won't spend much time on this. At the end of the day, it needs to be determined that the soils are fit for purpose. Strictly speaking, the British Standard is only a guidance document. It doesn't have to meet the British Standard, but it's a useful tool. In some instances, the British Standard is not even a high enough quality to guarantee the best quality for, say, a back garden scenario. But it's a good starting point. And really, for testing, you need to be looking at both the horticultural and the contaminants as part of a package. Now, a lot of the laboratories in the UK, when they're asked to test for BS 3882 or BS 8601, they do not automatically include a list of contaminants, and that's wrong. They should be, and I know that a lot of local authority contaminated land officers, get fed up with receiving topsoil analysis information for projects, but there's no contamination data with it. The two should go together, and the reason I say that is that it's in the British Standard. This is the second page of Table 1 in the British Standard for topsoil. There's the same for the subsoil, and I won't read it out to you. You can see it for yourself. Notes 3 and 4. Clearly say that contamination testing should be undertaken. This is the language that all the environmental consultants on this webinar will be very, very familiar with. It's there. So if you're being issued with topsoil analysis or subsoil analysis for signing off or declaring that a soil's fit for purpose in a NHBC scheme. Make sure it comes with the contamination testing as well as the horticultural stuff. And just finally, I want to cover sort of the elements. I mentioned compaction a lot, soil compaction a lot. I think it's just worth highlighting what I perceive as all the functions of soil, certainly in our construction sector. And I think we forget some of these. We focus on getting the soil good enough to grow plants and clean enough to be healthy and safe. However, these are all relevant. I mean, here's your contaminated land remediation. Soils are used as clean cover systems, as Emma said, topsoil and subsoil. But for my world, in a landscaping environment, for a housing development, all of these should be ticked. Very often people want to grow food in their back gardens, or there's allotments as part of a housing development. Support for the landscape, as you said, gardens, street trees, playing fields, etc. Number 3 comes into relevance with biodiversity net gain. And then on the bigger picture of things like climate change, soil is the biggest terrestrial form of carbon storage. Apart from the oceans, it's the biggest form. So we should be encouraging our soils and getting our soils to sequester as much carbon as possible. To do that, they need to be healthy, functional, and do all these other things. SUDS, obviously, number 5 is relevant to SUDS. We've got to stop flooding our country, and soil is the biggest sponge to achieve that. Forget all the swales and the attenuation ponds and all those things. The rest of the site where there's topsoil should be attenuating water, and subsoil should be attenuating water. But we all think about getting the water into a drain, into a swale, and we're all happy when it's gone into an attenuation pond. The last resort should be the attenuation pond. Most of it should go back into the ground and recharge. So these are images of perfect gardens. This is what people buying the houses are thinking they're expecting. But over my time in the industry, these are the sort of scenarios that we rarely see quite a lot of, because typically the soils are not functioning properly. They're not doing all the things they're meant to be doing. They might be uncontaminated, but that's just one component of soil function. So these are all the properties that will deliver good soil functions. And of those, apart from plant nutrients, all of them need the soil to not be compacted. Full stop. This is what an uncompacted, well-structured, healthy soil looks like. But in the building process, this is what we do to it. We have to pick topsoil up particularly. We have to travel over subsoil. It's just part of the process. You can't avoid that. That's fine. But we must make sure we reinstate the soils, decompact the soils, put the topsoil back, store it properly, all these things, so that over a shortest period of time as possible, the soils will go back to delivering all their functions, because obviously these soils will not deliver all the functions we want them to be. Here's just a graphical showing of that. The first photo I showed you of uncompacted, healthy soil. Over half of that soil is actually pore space, void, for air and water to sit in it. And yet when it's compacted, you lose all that porosity, that ability to attenuate water and drain water. And that is the big problem we have with construction. So here are just a few tips, a few pointers, but all of this should be really covered within a soil management plan. And if NHBC are starting to sort of demand soil management plans as part of the submission, as well as all the environmental contamination information, that will really, really help the situation. But it's a lot of it is covered by the British Standard as well and the DEFRA code. So strip the soils correctly, handle the soils when non-plastic. If you've got to bring in, I mean, Kim mentioned her free draining subsoil. That's a compaction resistant, very sandy soil, which will not be plastic at all. It will remain as a non-plastic soil, so it can be handled throughout the winter. Excellent if you've got to cart materials through at this time of year. So these are all the sort of ideas, but they should be picked up. And this is one of my bugbears. This is the traditional way that a ground worker no disrespect to them, will decompact a back garden subsoil and topsoil. They use the teeth of the bucket. This does not work. Look at the length of the teeth. They will just tickle the surface of whatever soil they're trying to decompact. And this is a classic scenario. Here we have a back garden. You can see the patios in, the pathways in, and here we have it. We have a loose, lovely little bit of 150 mil of uncompacted topsoil, which has literally just been placed on compacted subsoil. Before this was a back garden, this was the main trafficking route through the site for all the dumpers and all the excavators and material storage. Suddenly it's turned back into a back garden, but this is what is the classic scenario. And in reality, when we're looking at soil functions, this is what we're basically giving to the customer and the local authority and the environment. We're giving them 150 mil of water attenuation potential and rooting potential. It ends up, because you've got such compacted subsoil, there's no ability for the water to drain away. There's no ability for the grass to survive a hot summer. So you've got waterlogged gardens, customer complaints, and this is where this 150 of topsoil comes in. Greenfield developments always have a surplus of topsoil. If we increase the amount of topsoil that went into these back gardens and all landscape areas, you would use up that topsoil. You just need to, the cut and fill needs to be decided early on. It's not, it won't generate more subsoil. It just means the balance is adjusted before we get to this point, and more topsoil can be used. And I'll explain why. In reality, this is the scenario you get. This is a bit of public open space where 150 of topsoil was placed over compacted subsoil, and you can just see the water can't get away. The geese love it. That's your biodiversity box ticked, possibly, but look, that is not where everyone's going to come and play, is it? It's a complete failure. So soil compaction leaves a legacy of problems that prevent soils from fulfilling their functions to the optimum. So if we can deal with soil compaction in the process of stripping, stockpiling, and then reinstating soils in development sites, we'll go a long way to improving sort of all of their functions and so on. This is the sort of piece of kit that should be used. This is a single tooth ripper tine that can be attached to an excavator. They come in all shapes and sizes. This is a big one on a 20-ton excavator, but they, even a 2 or 3 ton excavator can have them. Obviously, the ripping depth is different. But this is literally pulling a tooth, like a subsoiler would in an agricultural field, through the subsoil, a compacted subsoil, and you can just see it's opening up the subsoil. That's going to allow water and roots and air to get into that subsoil layer, which is an important component of the scheme. Here's our compacted subsoil, our decompacted subsoil, sorry. You can see the patio at the back there. The developers looking very happy with themselves standing on the patio. But this is reality. This is what decompacted subsoil looks like. Now, there's some big old lumps in here. This was a heavy clay soil. So there's big lumps. The excavator then put the bucket on, swapped the ripper tine for the bucket, and then just patted down and broke down some of these bigger lumps. But that is absolutely fine, what's been done there. Here's the excavator. It's got the bucket on still, and he's now picking up the topsoil, the nice, dark, rich, organic topsoil, full of carbon, full of microbes, all the goodness. This is going to go down as a 300 ml layer, spread across the gardens. And this is what the end result is. This is right on the edge, so it looks compacted, but actually that was all decompacted, that soil. You've got 300 ml of topsoil, ready for turf to be going on. It probably needs a little tickle with a rotavator, and then turf goes straight on it. No more done. And uncompacted subsoil. So if this can be implemented as part of a remediation strategy where there's a clean cover system, this would be fantastic. It's not just dealing with the contamination, it's also dealing with all these other important elements. You've now, rather than 150 mil of water attenuation potential, you've got 600 mil. You've got less surplus topsoil to dispose of, greater drought tolerance, more stored carbon, and I can guarantee you happier customers, less complaints, and less costs for going back into gardens and having to redo them all. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Tim, for that. Some great photos there.